And we're going to move on now to the ethics, practicality and legality of the freedom to protest in this country, particularly as it pertains to Palestine Action. Now, the Metropolitan Police say they arrested more than 500 people during a big protest in London on Saturday against the continuing ban on that campaign group. The government says Palestine Action is a terrorist group. In July of last year, anti-terror legislation was used to make support for the group illegal. A High Court judge struck down that designation, but it remains in force pending an appeal. After that High Court judgment, the Met indicated they were unlikely to make arrests. Last month, however, the Metropolitan Police issued a statement saying the following: while the High Court has found the proscription of Palestine Action to be unlawful, it has confirmed the impact of that judgment will not take effect until the government's appeal has been considered, which could take many months. That means it is still a criminal offence to support Palestine Action. They repeated this on Friday. Well, Tim Crosland is a former government lawyer and coordinator of Defend Our Juries. That's the group which called for the demonstration on Saturday, and he joins us now in the studio. Tim, good morning.
Good morning, Amal.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us after what I know has been a very, very busy weekend for you. Look, the Met says this is quite simple. Until the appeal is heard, the government's legislation is enforceable. They've made that clear a few times, so it's not surprising they've made arrests.
I think anybody watching the scenes on Saturday unfold, as many people have, would just know from watching it something is deeply wrong. 523 people peacefully, silently staging a vigil against genocide, against the weaponisation of terrorism laws to silence opposition to genocide, being treated as terrorists, hauled into the back of police vans, people aged between 18 and 87, many of them elderly, many of them disabled, a block of the descendants of Holocaust survivors. And I don't think we need to get too legalistic to understand there's something deeply wrong and troubling about that for a democracy.
But I do want to talk about the right of protest and in particular law. On the genocide, the word you use, as you all know, I'm bound to say, because it's true, that the ICJ is looking into that. There's an ongoing case. Israel obviously vigorously denies that what they have done it qualifies as genocide. And I'd be grateful if we could keep this to the ethics and the legality of what you were doing on Saturday. That's the issue at hand. We've spoken about the issue, the actions in Gaza, hugely on this programme, and will continue to. The Met Police say they're just enforcing the law. And the government has put down legislation. You might say that the government ought not to have done, in which case that's your position. But what's your argument against what the Metropolitan Police are doing? Because they are saying they have an instruction from the statute book and they're enforcing it.
Well, there are two parts to the response to that. The first is that the Metropolitan Police is bound by the Human Rights Act. It's bound to uphold our democratic freedoms. And two of those are the right to freedom of expression and the right to peaceful assembly. And the law from the European Court of Human Rights is really clear about that. You can only interfere with those rights in the context of political speech, in the context of a protest, if that speech incites violence or hatred against others. So this is where we come back to the context of the protest. It is really clear that the subject of this protest is the precise opposite of that. It's calling for an end to violence. So the law is clear. It is unjustifiable to interfere with those democratic rights in those circumstances. There's a second part of the argument, and you mentioned this already. In February, 3 senior High Court judges ruled that the proscription of Palestine Action was unlawful, as violating the Home Secretary's own policy, as violating the Human Rights Act, and as violating our convention rights.
But that's got to go through an appeal. And that appeal hasn't been heard yet. I hear what you're saying.
But in the meantime, that is what the British courts have said. They've made that decision.
And Parliament and the police have said something different. And that's that might be a conflict, and that's an interesting constitutional question. But from the point of view of the Metropolitan Police, whose arrests on Saturday you disapprove of and don't like, aren't they just doing what they're required to do?
Well, it's clear that they're not doing what they're required to do, because when, on the 13th of February, they made a statement saying they were going to stop arresting people for expressing support for Palestine Action because that was the most proportionate approach they could take, nobody complained about that. Nobody said that seemed like a wrong thing for the Met to be doing. And it was on the basis of that statement that we arranged this protest on Saturday. And then with just less than 2 weeks to go, they announce a change to that policy without any rational explanation. They say it's because the government have been granted leave to appeal to the Court of Appeal, but that doesn't stand up to scrutiny because we always knew this was going to the Court of Appeal. It was obvious to everybody it was going to the Court of Appeal. So they've changed their policy without any rational explanation. Our lawyers have written to the Met and said this is unlawful. This is an abuse of your powers to change your policy without any logic. And we've had no response to that at all.
Well, we'd like to get a response to that, which is why we asked the Metropolitan Police on. They've not come on this morning, and we would like to reissue that invitation so that we can see what their logic was. In the meantime, Tim Crosland, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Amar.